Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the invite, Suleiman and Lamzex. It's a pleasure to be here and to actually see so many people. I'm always surprised when education gets a lot of people to come together. Surprised, उसका रीज़न जब मैं बात करूँगा क्राइसिस पे तो तब आ जाएगा कि क्राइसिस इतना बड़ा है लेकिन तालीम पे लोग आते हैं बात करने, which is always a good thing. To save on a bit of time, I will now introduce the speakers of the panelists and invite them to join me on the stage or to be online if we connection वगैरह हो गया है. So in no particular order, Mr. Mahboob Mahmood, the founder for Knowledge Platform. Mahboob आ जाइए. Adnan Qureshi Saab, who's the Vice President, Teach the World Foundation. Salman Naveed, CEO for PAMS. And Izzah Farrakh is joining us online. She's a Senior Education Specialist for the World Bank.
अच्छा जी, तो एक तो अली ने काम आसान कर दिया थोड़ा, जो बहुत सारी डिस्ट्रप्शंस हैं वो अली ने सेट कर दी. What I'll do is very briefly, मुझे सुलेमान ने कहा कि 5 मिनट से ज़्यादा ही लेने आपने. किसी टीचर को ये कहना 5 मिनट में कर दो बड़ा मुश्किल काम है, पर खैर. लेकिन just to set up कि crisis at a larger level क्या लग रहा है, and then of course the panelists will talk about specifics much more deeply. देखिए मेरे ख्याल में 4 बड़ी चीजें, मैं अब पाकिस्तान की बात करूंगा. अली ने डिस्ट्रप्शंस लार्जर की बात की. 4 चीजें बड़ी जो है ना वो जहन में रखिए, बहुत हमें इम्पैक्ट कर रही हैं वो. पहली चीज हमारी पॉपुलेशन. इस दफा का सर्वे जो 23 का है सेंसस was a very rude awakening. We are still growing at 2.55%. We have a population base of 240 plus million, which means that at 2.5, about 6 to 7 million children are being born in Pakistan every year. देखिए young लोगों को पहले 15, 20 साल, 22 साल are investment into young people, right? So we have to get ready not just for the stock that is there. हमें पता है 26 million बच्चा स्कूलों से बाहर है, 5 से 16, but the pipeline effect, which is कि 6-7 million बच्चा हर साल आएगा, जिसकी अगले 15-20 साल हमने एजुकेशन, स्किल्स, ट्रेनिंग, ये सारी चीजें और जो इन्वेस्टमेंट्स होती हैं, हेल्थ, बाकी सब चीजें वो तैयारी करनी है और वो रखनी है. वो हम नहीं हैं तैयार. तो एक पॉपुलेशन. दूसरा पॉवर्टी. वर्ल्ड बैंक की एक मैं रिपोर्ट देख रहा था, 40% के करीब पाकिस्तान पुअर है. इसकी इम्प्लीकेशन सोचिए, 40% पुअर है, इसका मतलब है 50-60% जो है वो अपने बच्चों की तालीम और सेहत पे ऑप्टिमली खर्च नहीं कर सकता. ये समझना जरूरी है, तालीम महंगी चीज है. क्वालिटी एजुकेशन इज एक्सपेंसिव. समवन हैज टू पे फॉर इट. Parents, clearly more than half of Pakistani parents can't pay for it. So we have to figure out a way in which the rest of society can pay for education. जैसे टीके लगवाने जरूरी हैं, हम कह चुके हैं 25A में अपने कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के, तालीम जरूरी है. अगर जरूरी है तो फिर सोसाइटी को ये फंड करनी पड़ेगी सब बच्चों के लिए, वरना नुकसान कौम उठाएगी. तीसरी चीज इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन. 47 के एंड में, 47 के एंड में पहली एजुकेशन कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई. उसमें कहा गया, और उसमें हुज हू था पाकिस्तान का उस वक्त का, उसमें कहा गया कि जी तालीम बिल्कुल राइट है बच्चों का और हाई स्कूल तक है, लेकिन हमारे पास पैसे नहीं. वो मंत्र कि हमारे पास पैसे नहीं आज तक चल रहा है, हालांकि वो मंत्र गलत है. जितने ममालिक में मैथ एजुकेशन हुई है सब उस वक्त गरीब थे जब उन्होंने शुरू की मैथ एजुकेशन. अमेरिका, जापान, मेजी रेवोल्यूशन, जो मर्जी देख लें, प्रायोरिटी का इशू है, पैसे का इशू नहीं है. 2021 की आप यूएनडीपी की रिपोर्ट जो हफीज पाशा लीड राइटर थे उन्होंने लिखी, उन्होंने बड़े साफ ये कहा कि 2660 बिलियन रुपया आप अमीरों को टैक्स ब्रेक या सब्सिडीज में दे देते हैं. If you wanted to triple the amount of expenditure on education, वो आप सब्सिडीज ना दीजिए, वो आप टैक्स ब्रेक्स ना दीजिए, इधर ले आइए तालीम में. तालीम तिगनी हो सकती है, जो कि अब इमरजेंसी में हम वादा भी कर रहे हैं 4-5% पे ले जाने का, उससे ज्यादा हो सकता है अगर प्रायोरिटी. सो तीसरी चीज इकोनॉमिक कंडीशंस का वावेला और प्रायोरिटी एजुकेशन की. चौथी, एंड दिस इज द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट आई थिंक, इज ईस्टरली का, एक विलियम ईस्टरली का पेपर था 2000 का, 2001 का, 2000 का, जिसमें उसने 99 का डेटा पाकिस्तान का लेकर दिखाया था कि हमेशा से पाकिस्तान अपने कंपैरेटर मुल्क, यानी जिनके साथ इनकम तकरीबन बराबर, ग्रोथ ट्रेजेक्टरी तकरीबन बराबर, उनसे जब मुआवजा करते हैं तो पाकिस्तान ने हमेशा तालीम और सेहत पे कम खर्चा किया बाकी मुल्कों की निस्बत. आज जो नंबर्स अब अली दिखा रहा था आउटलायर के पाकिस्तान के, दे आर नॉट अ सरप्राइज. 2000 तक का डेटा उसने देखा था, 2000 के बाद का डेटा भी यही शो करता है. रीजनली, इंटरनेशनली, हर तरह से. ईस्टरली के पेपर का नाम था ग्रोथ विदाउट डेवलपमेंट. तब तो ग्रोथ भी होती थी पाकिस्तान में, अब तो ग्रोथ भी नहीं होती ना. ग्रोथ से भी गए, पर वो लिंक है उसका एजुकेशन. सो हमेशा हमने एजुकेशन और हेल्थ पे कम खर्चा किया है. एंड इट्स अ 75-year पैटर्न दैट इज कंटिन्यूइंग स्टिल. ये चार चीजें शेप कर रही हैं उस क्राइसिस को, जिसकी अभी हम बात शुरू करेंगे. 26 मिलियन मैंने कहा आउट ऑफ स्कूल है. लर्निंग पॉवर्टी का अली ने जिक्र किया. तो पहला सवाल मेरा इज़ा से यही है. इज़ा, you're at the bank. Bank has done some extensive work both on learning poverty as well as the out of school children. What is the state of crisis? How do you see it right now in Pakistan?
Thank you, Dr. Bari. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Dr. Chima said. I think startling figures presented there and startling figures presented by yourself as well. But when we unpack learning poverty, something that was actually quite surprising and is being reinforced when we see the results of board exams, the national assessment test, achievement test that Bani Saab and the federal ministry led last year, is that girls are not coming to school. So unpacking learning poverty, schooling deprivation is certainly higher among girls. But when girls come to school, they're actually learning better than boys are. The NAT showed that, our learning poverty figures show that, and exam results also show that. So having said that, what I wanted to start my conversation with was a little bit of optimism. Okay, there is potential. We are making gains on a historically underserved population group, which is girls. Unfortunately, that's the only bit of positive news I'm going to give over here. And we spoke about Pakistan. We compared it regionally as well. And just to give you a little bit of context on a learning poverty figure, it is actually 18.3 percentage points higher than the average for the South Asia region, and 16.6 percentage points higher than for your average lower middle income country. We have a figure called learning adjustment years of schooling, which shows that even when our children graduate from high school, they're actually only acquiring about 5.1 years of schooling. So starting with primary through middle through high, they've invested 11 to 12 years of your life. But the actual acquisition in terms of learning is equal to 5.1%. So, and then, we spoke about human capital. Faisal Saab spoke about 40% of Pakistanis being below the poverty line, but 40% of Pakistani children, as a consequence of this, of course, are also stunted. So what we are seeing right now in the education sector is actually a combination not only of poor service delivery in education, but also as a result of the choices and that parents have, right? So stunting is not just associated with poor maternal and infant health, but also the quality of the soil in which we grow our crops, the quality of the water, sanitation arrangements, etc. So we have a major education emergency, but it's not an isolated incident. It's also being fueled by challenges in other sectors as well. And Dr. Chima spoke about human capital. Faisal Saab also spoke about human capital and female labor force participation. A child born in Pakistan today will only be able to achieve 41% of the human capital potential. So that again really gives you some food for thought that we're not even achieving half of our human capital potential. And when it comes to provinces like Balochistan, it's at 0.32, so 32%, which is equivalent to Niger, which is the lowest performing economy in sub-Saharan Africa. Female labor force participation, something that we can also call human capital utilization among women in Pakistan, is 0.08. So just 8% of women are actually achieving the human capital potential. And when we rank Pakistan globally, we are at 141 out of 174 countries. We're all, very familiar with the public data that comes out of learning, assessments in Pakistan, in the provinces, board exams. But the World Bank has a global knowledge product called the Global Education Policy Dashboard. And we conducted a survey across Pakistan last year. And what it did is it highlighted gaps between what evidence suggests is effective in promoting learning and what the actual practices are in Pakistan right now. And we had a whole bunch of indicators. We looked at teaching, we looked at school management, we looked at policy inputs and infrastructure, and we looked at learners. And again, we compared Pakistan to global proficiency standards. In math, only 34% of Pakistan's children met global proficiency standards, and in language, only 28%. This is for 4-year-olds, grade 4 students, at which you also measure learning poverty, so 10-year-olds. And what we saw is that teacher knowledge was a major weakness. Only 28% of teachers were proficient in what they were meant to teach. Pedagogical practices, how they deploy what they know to help students learn, was also at 28%. Instructional leadership, also super poor. And to compound all this, which we know affects attendance and enrollment, is basic infrastructure in schools across Pakistan was very, very poor. And this I'm giving you as a national average. And you know that provinces such as Balochistan, rural Sindh is much lower. So, and we also looked at children who were coming into school, and only 9.5% of children coming into school actually showed readiness for learning. And student attendance in Pakistan, although one would say 81.6% is fairly high, when you look at the complexity of our curriculum, when you look at how much they have to learn daily, 81.6% is again one of the lowest figures that you see globally. And how does EdTech now? I'll talk a little bit about what we have learned, how EdTech can actually leapfrog learning, and what some of the risks and challenges associated with EdTech are. I think our colleagues at LAMS are very familiar with the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel that comes up with a list of good bias, great bias, emerging but poor evidence, and bad bias in education. And I think one of the traps that we face is that we think that investing in hardware like laptops, tablets, computers will leapfrog learning. But these inputs alone are actually called bad bias, right? They need to be complemented with a well thought out strategy, complementary measures, and teachers really have a big role in this. We cannot replace the teacher in the classroom with technology. Other evidence such as adaptive learning software, teaching at the right level is an approach that is really gaining traction, where the teacher teaches not to the age cohort of the child, but to the learning ability and the proficiency levels of the child. So what we need to do is we need to look at...
Izzah, my apologies, but can I, before you go to recommendations, can I stop you there? Because I need to talk to other people about the problem first before we come to the recommendation, if that's okay. I'll get back to you about the recommendation part thing. Mahboob, if I may come to you. So we've been hearing about EdTech potential for at least a decade and a half, if not more. And बीच में COVID भी आया, जिसमें सब बंद हो गया, सिर्फ EdTech type pressure रहा. But despite that, 26 million out, quality variance जो इज़ा ने अभी बताया भी इतनी बुरी, what is stopping us from achieving the EdTech potential in at least K-12 sector in Pakistan? मसला क्या है, होता क्यों नहीं है फिर? Potential की बात किए जा रहे हैं. I think that's a good question. And I think before I just get to that, I'd like to give a statement that Isaac Asimov made. And he said that in the pre industrial world, personalized learning was for the very few. So, if you're a noble, you can get archery and statecraft and religion or poetry, whatever suits you. And then we went into the industrial world. And in the industrial world, we had standardized, depersonalized learning for the masses. And now we are moving into the knowledge economy. And we now have the potential of personalized education for the masses. So I think Dr. Chima had said, what is it that, what is the direction in which we are heading? So one question is, what is EdTech trying to solve? Is EdTech trying to make you better at getting better exam results, more proficient exam takers? In other words, are you trying to optimize your performance within the existing system? And the second is, are you trying to now create a new kind of learning paradigm which is personalized? So if you look at, I feel that this Asimov quotation is good because it kind of frames what are we trying to do with EdTech. So now regarding the first component, you see, we keep saying that hardware is not a problem, is not a good return, and I completely agree that hardware by itself is not a good return. But the reality is that we now have 55 million kids in the education system, but only about 3 million kids have their own devices, and using EdTech is not like ordering food on Food Panda. It's not 5 minutes a day. Okay, some people spend 15 minutes a day. You have to use a device for 2, 3, 4 hours a day. So the first problem is a massive, massive infrastructure problem. We don't have devices and we don't have internet bandwidth to address that. Arva's sitting here from TCF and she's struggling with this because in some schools they have 10 tablets and we are working with them to try to put more like get content in there. But it's tough. Only a few kids have devices, only a few schools have devices. So this is a major, major issue that unless we invest more in education, we're not going to be able to realize the potential of EdTech. The other factor is that EdTech requires much more investment up front. So if you compare India to Pakistan, India has 450 startups in the education field, which have raised over $3 billion of investment. Pakistan has maybe 15 to 20 startups that have raised about 20 million. So, not only has there been an underinvestment on the infrastructure side, there's also been a massive investment in the solution side. And thirdly, we are our schools, our teachers, and so on are not ready to embrace this. They took on EdTech as kind of a jugaad during COVID, but have not really embraced this. And I think fourthly, we should not put too much emphasis on the schools and the teachers. We need to also create direct bypasses to the kids, because ultimately, if you want to create this new generation of kids, you can't just do it by improving the skills of old teachers because it's happening too slowly and it's a very difficult task to do. So we have to think of education as schools plus.
Okay. And Adnan, coming to you, have a model, Teach the World, which relies on tablets, is not structured school, at least not for now, and does it at a reasonable cost as well. So thoda sa ek to model bata dein, but then also talk about the question of what do you see as the way of getting to these 26 million with quality education.
Absolutely. Can you get? I just want to reiterate that point that until we, uh, as you pointed out, the scope and the scale of the problem is now so big that we have to understand that status quo approaches are not going to work. Just the back of the envelope, if you do the math, you'd need to bring 12 to 13 schools every day for the next 20 years, and you'll need 800 to 900,000 teachers who just don't sprout like that. A good teacher takes time to develop. I want to make this point very emphatically and forcefully that if that approach hasn't worked to solve this problem in 75 years, I don't see that happening. And we need to get out of that rut of brick and mortar and traditional, as you pointed out, teachers, and need alternative delivery channels or modalities through which we can bring this education. Fortunately, we've been working on this for the past 6-7 years and have developed this low-cost model, which we call the digital micro school. It's a one-room school that we bring to the heart of the communities where these out-of-school communities and children reside. You do not need infrastructure. You can convert any room that can house 25 students very quickly into this learning space. You bring in these low-cost devices, preloaded with some of the best content in math, English, and Urdu, because that's the definition of foundational literacy uh, and the need of the hour at the moment. One way to think about this, we're in such a dire situation that when a patient comes to the ER, you have triage, right? You don't. The idea is to stabilize the patient and have them at least back to.
You're creating education ERs.
In some ways, that's what we see ourselves, the mission that we're at. The scope and scale of the problem is so big, we need to build the absolute foundational base for these children before we can even think of fixing the rest of the pipeline.
And what is your cost for doing that?
So over time, we've brought this down to roughly $120, but I foresee one of the per child per year. But this is a sort of cost at the scale we're operating at the moment. This is something I radically see going down as incremental economies of scale, both in terms of hardware, in terms of software. Once a system like this, a delivery channel like this, is spread around and we reach a critical mass of 100,000 or 200,000. And the other thing we have to also realize is that this allows us to tackle the issue of quality as well, both from some of our local partners over here, but it's a sort of personal and organizational pride that we're bringing in some of the best game-based content that's available from the world. So our children, the poorest of the poor over here in Sindh, Punjab, are using some of the same products in foundational math and English that some of the students from the South Korean districts or the Californian districts are using, and performing and outperforming some of those students based on the results that we're getting. So for me, technology delivered through this medium is a smart buy. What we need to work on with the state, that there's no, even the private sector's capacity will limit after some point, with plateau after some point. We can perhaps create 1,000 of these one-room schools, but eventually the responsibility, the constitutional mandate lies with the state. And it's the state that has to own up, with the help of the private sector, get out of that rut of brick and mortar business as usual approaches and take approaches like these, because I do not foresee any other way of being able to tackle this 26 million out of school children problem that we have.
Bahut shukriya, Salman. Math and science. People, usually think languages are harder to do under EdTech. It's a presumption. It might not be true, but there is that presumption. But math और science में तो ऐसी बात नहीं है. लोग समझते हैं बड़े आराम से EdTech से पढ़ाई भी जा सकती है, quality भी बेहतर की जा सकती है, क्योंकि supposedly ज़्यादा objective चीज़ है math और science ये वो. So what's your experience, and do you see EdTech is the way to बहुत deficits हैं on STEM education? Do you see that as a way to reach out to these very large numbers, both in school and out of school?
Can everyone hear me? Yes, the short answer is EdTech or a प्लेटफॉर्म या जिस तरीके से भी हम पढ़ाना चाहते हैं, वो क्लासरूम के अंदर हो, क्लासरूम के बाहर हो, वो ट्यूशन एकेडमी में हो, वो कंप्यूटर के थ्रू हो, वो इंटरनेट बेस्ड हो, everything can and will help, goes without saying. किस हद तक is a question mark. The one of the challenges that we're seeing more and more, and uh, with certain disagreements and with all respect, जो प्रोवाइडर्स हैं इस वक्त पाकिस्तान के अंदर, वो टीच द वर्ल्ड फाउंडेशन हो, वो एडटेक प्रोवाइडर्स हो, वो प्राइवेट सेक्टर हो या वो सरकार हो, सब ने इस वक्त इमरजेंसी रिस्पांस, टू बोरो योर टर्म, वो उस मोड के अंदर इस वक्त ऑपरेट करें. देयर इज नो थॉट लीडरशिप. हम एक्चुअली तालीम से चाहते क्या हैं? सो इट्स लाइक द मुसलमान कनंड्रम, राइट? यू पुट 10 together and you ask them for one definition and you'll never get it. वो तालीम के साथ भी हमारे यही प्रॉब्लम है, and it's fine. I think it's fine. वो divergent views होने चाहिए सबके कि हम तालीम से चाहते क्या हैं, मगर कुछ चीज़ें जो हम collectively हमें decide कर लेना चाहिए कि हम चाहते क्या हैं. And to your point, मैथ सबको आनी चाहिए. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division सबको आनी चाहिए. So it's not about kids in school or out of school. ये सबको आनी चाहिए. अगर वो आनी चाहिए तो वो आएगी कैसे? वो EdTech is an instrument, a teacher is an instrument, a parent is an instrument, society is an instrument, TV is an instrument, a mobile device or a computer is an instrument. वो अब हमने collectively या सरकार ने ये decide करना है कि हमारा pathway होगा क्या. I think it's unfair to ask EdTech providers, sorry बारी साहब, कि काम क्यों नहीं कर रहा या इतना ज़्यादा काम क्यों नहीं कर रहा, because they cannot on a national scale decide कि हम चाहते क्या हैं. A few months ago, a friend of mine who has worked in this space but has now retired from the space, not retired, uh, asked me a very simple question. उसने कहा 2 साल हम सरकारी schools बंद कर देते हैं just to rejig everything that we've thought कि education deliver कैसे होनी चाहिए, and we start doing it from year 3 onwards. क्या फर्क पड़ेगा? And unfortunately, I could not give him an answer other than the fact कि मेरी तरह के और बहुत सारे लोग होंगे जिनकी नौकरियां चली जाएंगी, but actually we might, Pakistan may not have an impact. जो ed tech और math या STEM के अंदर जो one of the bigger challenges that we're facing right now is we're not allowing ed tech into the answer of हम चाहते क्या है तालीम से. We want well-equipped teachers where there are teachers in school, government के हों, private के हों, NGOs के हों या मदारिस के हों, to be equipped with the right kind of knowledge, content knowledge and pedagogical tools के वो classroom के अंदर रियाजी सिखा सके. यहाँ पे जिसने भी metric या O levels किया हुआ है, please हाथ खड़ा कर लें. I'll do this, sorry, very quickly. Metric या
दूसरा तो किया होगा.
yes. जिन्होंने हाथ खड़े किए में हाथ खड़े रखें बस. सॉरी, आई जस्ट टेक 20 more seconds. तीसरी जमात के क्लासरूम में जाके आप में से कितने लोग हैं जो विलिंगली रियाजी पढ़ा सकते हैं? जो नहीं पढ़ा सकते वो हाथ नीचे कर लें या नहीं पढ़ाना चाहते. सो हाफ, ग्रेट, आई थिंक हाफ ऑफ द रूम वांट्स टू और कैन. in most private schools, including elite private schools, in most government schools, जहां पे सबने मैट्रिक या ओ लेवल्स किया हुआ है और सबने रियाजी जरूर पढ़ी होगी, लाजमी, वहां पे मैथ के जिस दिन टीचर की छुट्टी हो उस दिन सब्स्टिट्यूट टीचर आके मैथ नहीं पढ़ाते. दिस इज द नॉर्म एवरीवेयर. एंड बेसिक मसला क्या है कि हम सब ने मैट्रिक और ओ लेवल्स ज्यादातर हम सॉरी डॉक्टर अली चीमा एक्सक्लूड कर रहा हूं मैं आपको इस बात से, वो शायद लर्निंग के लिए स्कूल में या यूनिवर्सिटी में नहीं गए थे, वो एग्जाम देने के लिए गए थे. जब उन्होंने इम्तिहान दे दिया, उर्दू के अंदर ए लेवल्स कर दिया, ओ लेवल्स कर लिया, उसके अंदर ए ग्रेड आया, मगर उसके बावजूद मोनोलिंगुअल ही रहे, सिर्फ अंग्रेजी ही आती. मैथ को जब तक हम इस तरह इस्तेमाल नहीं करेंगे एडटेक के अंदर कि टीचर्स को क्या सपोर्ट चाहिए और कांस्टेंट सपोर्ट चाहिए. सिर्फ बच्चा इज नॉट द ऑडियंस. द ऑडियंस इज अ पेरेंट. द ऑडियंस इज आल्सो अ टीचर बिकॉज दैट इज हाउ अ चाइल्ड इज लर्निंग. आपको प्रॉक्सी के ऊपर भी एडटेक में उसी तरह इन्वेस्ट करना है जैसे आप बच्चे पे कर रहे हैं.
अच्छा, वो शेर भी है ना कुछ ऐसा, कुछ शेर दे लोग भी जालिम सी, कुछ सानू मरंदा शौक. तो एक तरफ से अली चीमा ने ज्यादा टाइम लिया, दूसरी तरफ से सुलेमान ने मेरा इस सेशन का टाइम काट दिया. सो इसलिए अब थोड़ा सा टाइम रहता है. तो उसमें मैं चाहूंगा कि ऑडियंस अगर कोई सवाल है आप कर लें, क्योंकि दूसरे राउंड का वक्त अब रह नहीं गया। जी मैडम प्लीज, वो माइक आ रहा है, हम 4-5 सवाल इकट्ठे ले लें तो ज्यादा बेहतर होगा ना। ये दरमियान में, हाँ जी प्लीज, वो सामने।
I just wanted, Assalamu alaikum ji, I just wanted to share a data point. I work in the EdTech space और corporate training programs में करती रही। एक डेटा पॉइंट है कि हमारे प्लेटफॉर्म पे अगर एक महीने में 1800 लोग रजिस्टर करने की अटेम्प्ट करते हैं एज टीचर्स, वो क्लेम करते हैं कि उन्होंने अंडर ग्रेड डिग्री की हुई है, बट देयर उसमें से सिर्फ एक या दो लोग हैं हु आर एबल टू पास थ्रू अ 3 स्टेप प्रोसेस, जिसमें हम सिंपल चीजें पूछते हैं, ये कर सकते हैं, ये कर सकते हैं, दे आर नॉट एबल टू रीड, अंडरस्टैंड एंड फॉलो वेरी सिंपल इंस्ट्रक्शंस।
जी बिल्कुल ठीक।
So it's a data
सो द
point.
क्वालिटी हमारी एजुकेशन की इवन एट अंडरग्रेड इज वेरी पुअर। जी सर को दीजिए, हम 4-5 इकट्ठे कर लेंगे तो देन विल देख।
बहुत शुक्रिया जी, जावेद तामरा फ्राम सियालकोट। महबूब साहब से मेरा क्वेश्चन, अभी इन्होंने अपनी स्पीच में ना टैबलेट्स का एक स्कूल का जिक्र किया, तो वो मेरा स्कूल था, मेरी इनसे बात हुई थी। तो डॉक्टर साहब इन्होंने वादा किया था कि हम अपना कंटेंट टैबलेट्स पे लेके आएंगे, तो मैं ये पूछना चाहता हूँ क्या इस साल हो जाएगा?
आपने वादा पूरा नहीं किया अभी तक अपना। जी और कोई सवाल? जी हाँ जी, वानी साहब को दीजिए। वानी साहब आपको तो जवाब देने वाली साइड पे होना चाहिए, सवाल वाली साइड। जी
जवाब है सर, कमेंट है बेस्ड ऑन
जी
दिस
जी
डिस्कशन।
बिस्मिल्लाह।
पहली बात तो सर ये, इट्स नॉट ईदर और, वी हैव टू गो फॉर एवरीथिंग। वे कहते हैं ये करो तो ये अच्छा है तो ये करो, वी हैव टू गो फॉर ब्लेंडेड लर्निंग, वी हैव टू अडेप्ट एवरी टूल, एवरी प्लेटफॉर्म टू ब्रिंग पॉजिटिविटी। जो इन्होंने बात की है कि एक सिंगल स्कूल में डिजिटल मीडियम से एक करेंगे आउटर स्कूल के लिए, वो भी सोल्यूशन है। आपको एक्सेस भी इम्प्रूव करना है, आपको न्यूट्रिशन भी इम्प्रूव करनी है, आपको पॉपुलेशन भी कंट्रोल करनी है, आपको एडटेक भी लाना है। तो ये सवाल अब खत्म हो गया है कि फलां चीज होगी, इट्स नॉट चिकन और एग, यू हैव टू डू एवरीथिंग and it has to be a 360 degrees approach, then we will be able to succeed. और जो important बात है, आखिरी बात, अगेन मेरा वापस घूम के वही बात है थी, जब 48% स्टंटिंग होगी तो आप वो बच्चा चाहे अटैक हो या ना हो, वो नहीं पड़ेगा। तो you have to address the nutrition and the health issue of the kids, then you will be able to allow kids to learn.
जी वो पीछे ले जाइए जी। आपने यदि कुछ कहना? नहीं, मैं आ रहा हूँ साथ, पीछे ले जाइए, सेकंड लास्ट। आप हाथ उठाए रखें ना, हाँ जी आपके पास आएंगे। जी हुक्म।
सर मेरा सवाल ये है कि इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ अ कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव एजुकेशनल पॉलिसी, इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ अ कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव एजुकेशनल पॉलिसी, जहाँ पे हमारे जो पॉलिसी मेकर्स हैं और जहाँ पे जो फैसला साज लोग हैं जो डिराइव करते हैं इस सारे प्रोसेस को, जो कंट्रोल करते हैं सारे प्रोसेस को, जब तक उनके अंदर क्लैरिटी नहीं होगी रिगार्ड्स के हम क्या करना चाह रहे हैं, हम करिकुलम को क्या डिजाइन दे रहे हैं, हम और हमारी जो आउटपुट्स होनी चाहिए एट डिफरेंट लेवल्स ऑफ एजुकेशन, और वो एक कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव और एक एलैबोरेट किस्म की पॉलिसी जब तक इन्फोर्स नहीं होगी और इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं होगी, तो ये सब जो डिस्कशंस हैं,
ठीक है जी,
व्हाट इज द फन?
डिस्कशन की एक तो खैर वैसे अपनी वैल्यू होती, बट आप बिल्कुल सही फरमा रहे हैं और अभी इनसे जवाब लेंगे। जी इधर आ जाइए।
Availability of AI, ChatGPTs, and how that could bring in personalized learning.
ठीक है जी, सवाल आपके सामने है, आप में से कोई भी अगर वन बाय वन एड्रेस जो आप करना चाहें उनमें से कर लें। महबूब, वी कैन स्टार्ट विद यू।
जी आपसे फिर बाद में बात कर लेंगे तो इंशाल्लाह आपको कंटेंट दिलवा देंगे। I just want to earlier Izzah Sahiba had raised the question and you had raised the question of investment in education. So how much money do we need and how are we going to get this? Because if we don't solve this, to be honest, the question is not EdTech or not, as Vani Saab said, we have to do everything. The question, the real essential question is, we're not putting enough money in education. By my estimate, the government spends less than $100 a year on education per child in the primary and middle school levels. Now, it's fine for us to say we should increase the budget, But is it going to happen? Let me just walk through some math. A dihadi worker in Karachi makes about $2,500 a year. So if he gets a job every year. Now, how much money do we need? Is $100 enough? Now, if you need to give a tablet to a kid, internet access, some kind of content, which we are not delivering, and so on, we need to spend about $200 a year per kid, apart from what we're doing on education, to really realize the potential of EdTech, right? But let's do the math. $200 a year per kid is $20 billion a year. In Pakistan, we need to be spending $20 billion a year more in education. Now, what is the return on investment on that? It's $200 a child. That means, keep in mind the $2,500 that a dihadi worker in Karachi is making. If you give a child $200 a year over 12 years, that's less than $2,500, right? And the return on investment will be 30 times the $2,500. In other words, if the incremental earning of that kid is only that of a dihadi worker, they'll make that back 30 times. In other words, there's no better form of investment than investing at the primary and middle school level into education and using EdTech. But how are we going to get this money? Today, I believe that children, the only way you can get that money is from the child themselves. In other words, if you're earning back your investment 30 times, you have to come up with creatives. We need digital currency. We need to untap the potential of children. Today, EdTech, the biggest opportunity of EdTech is capturing the data of the child and reselling it. In other words, the child can be the financier of his or her own education. So the issue is not so much EdTech, but how do we unlock enough capital to bring about this new revolution in education?
So just to answer, we are, as practitioners of digital, in a very rudimentary sense, we're already using AIs. Some of these platforms we use have adaptive mechanisms and machine learning algorithms built in that automatically creates the personalized learning journey for the child. So it teaches at the right level already. But baat ghuma phira ke wahi aati hai ki we've proven the concept, but until investment comes in at a massive scale, these technologies are not really going to be
Salman,
spread around.
Thank you, Ji. So to the data point that you mentioned, पाकिस्तान के अंदर I'm just going to list a few of major disruptions जो हुई हैं पिछले कुछ दिहाइयों के अंदर. एक 1998 के अंदर पहली मोटरवे inaugurate हुई, has changed how Pakistan travels, largely urban Pakistan travels. दूसरा, आपके पास शेल ने ग्लोबली एक इन्वेस्टमेंट की थी जो वो पाकिस्तान के अंदर भी लेके आए, और उन्होंने रीब्रांड किए अपनी आउटलेट्स और सिलेक्ट स्टोर्स खोले. 24 घंटे नॉन फार्मेसी 24 घंटे स्टोर्स खुले रहे. मेजर डिस्ट्रप्शन इन अगेन अर्बन सेंटर्स. तीसरी, तालीमी हवाले से जो ब्रिंगिंग टू योर डेटा, कनेक्टिंग इट टू योर डेटा पॉइंट, पाकिस्तान ने ये डिसाइड कर लिया कि 4 साल की डिग्री अंडरग्रेड की होनी चाहिए उन लोगों के लिए जिन्होंने स्कूल टीचर बनना है. तो उन्होंने बीएड प्रोग्राम शुरू किया, और बीएड प्रोग्राम इस तरह से शुरू किया कि वो अनफॉर्चुनेटली, एंड आई एम हैप्पी टू टेक दैट नेम, अल्लामा इकबाल ओपन यूनिवर्सिटी के थ्रू आप 4 साल की डिग्री कर लें. आपके पास इस वक्त, और ये नज इफेक्ट भी था और ये एक मेजर डिस्ट्रप्शन थी पाकिस्तान के तालीमी निज़ाम में. अब आपके पास लाखों लोग हैं जो बीएड कर चुके हैं. इस वक्त हजारों लोग हैं जो बीएड और एमएड के अंदर इस वक्त इनरोल्ड हैं, जिनको खुद नहीं कुछ आता, और वो इवेंचुअली उसी डिग्री की बेस के ऊपर प्राइवेट और पब्लिक स्कूल्स में जाएंगे.
Izzah, do you want to add anything before we conclude?
Just to add to what Mahboob Saab said is that definitely need to increase our education budgets, but also need to improve the efficiency and the equity of our education budgets. The way school budgeting happens right now is the more the children in the school, the greater your budget is. So automatically your bigger high schools that are already well-resourced end up getting more money. The smaller, overcrowded, multi-grade, single teacher schools, by virtue of just having the smallest student population and poor infrastructure, don't get that. And the second also is our human resource. We did a survey many years ago and found out that for every four teachers, you have one non-teaching staff in the public education sector. So we really need to trim down the excess human resource in our education sector so that the money actually goes towards our children who need it most.
बहुत शुक्रिया panelists, Izzah, Mahboob Saab, Adnan, Salman. ज़्यादा पैसा, ज़्यादा focus, all sorts of interventions, whether EdTech or otherwise, और quality consciousness, वरना इसके बगैर तालीम को हम crisis बहुत बड़ा, बहुत deep है. मेरे ख्याल में हमेशा इस पे लिखता भी रहता हूँ कि ये पाकिस्तान के लिए existential crisis है. अगर एजुकेशन में नहीं सॉल्व होगा तो बहुत मुश्किल है कि पाकिस्तान का फ्यूचर हम 30, 35, 40 साल बाद देख सकें. और वो चॉइस हम सब की है, each of us individually. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bari.